Man, we had snow come again. So as long as I couldn't work outside, I decided I would finish tearing this Volkswagen motor down. Or at least get it split. But I'm thinking, it's been interesting. It was the last time I had one of these apart. It was probably 30 years ago. And I had to try to remember the way, these crankcases are split. It's two halves, and they have an endless amounts of bolts and locating pins holding the two halves together. That's a Porsche design. And some of them bolts are in very not obvious places. So you got to be real careful. You can't just start trying to force them apart. But I remembered there was a couple of them that I had to think about a little bit. But then I also I bought a tool for splitting these crankcases. This goes in the oil pump. Okay, the oil pump drives right off the end of the crank or the camshaft. When you pull the oil pump out, this goes in there, and you can expand it, and it'll start splitting the cases because they can be kind of glued together. I don't know what it was I used last time. Looks like a kind of a silicone. But like I say, that was 30 years ago when I had this apart. But it looks to be good. But I'm thinking, I don't intend on tearing this down again. So as long as I'm in there, I think I'm going to replace the main bearings and the rod bearings, just to have them out of the way. For all the rod bearings is like $20. Main bearings is like 50. So, it's not a big deal. But I think just to be on the safe side, I'll do that. But I have to take these apart because I don't remember offhand. See, I had replaced the crankshaft in this one time. Well, twice actually. I replaced it one time, and the one that I put in there, I had bought from a guy, and evidently it had a crack in it because after like 100 miles, he could, it was actually broken in the middle. I mean, you could wiggle it a little bit. It still ran, but it was wiggling. So I had to tear it apart and put another crank in. But the crank I put in, and I think I probably got a spare crank sitting around here someplace, was from a guy who raced the Formula V. So he had one that was all magnafluxed, but it had been reground. So I need oversized mains, I believe, is what I need. I think the rod bearings might be standard, but I don't recall this offhand. I'm going to have to take it apart and check. But then I'll replace. The mains very seldom go bad, but the rod bearing can go bad. But the thing had been a line board, to make sure the case was square. So I don't think there's going to be a problem there. Though, they can always surprise you, but it looks pretty solid. But to be on the safe side, I'll replace them rod bearings. And I could replace some bushings up here, but I really can't see them going bad. And even the rod bearings, it's a pretty massive crankshaft, but like I said, I did break that one at a time, which was just weird, because it's not like I'm hot rodding it. And before I got this one, years ago, I had a 67 Volkswagen bus. And that one I had actually brought into the Volkswagen dealer, and they rebuilt the motor. Well, it wasn't but like 200 miles later, a rod went out of it. So obviously they didn't know what they were doing. So that time it blew up the crankshaft. The whole case was gone. It was just a mess. So it ended up being quite a a ruckus getting that fixed. They ended up putting in a factory motor, which ended up costing me quite a little money, but at least I got the money back from what the work they had done. I mean, this involved a lawsuit and all kinds of rubbish. And it was funny then, because then I go pick the vehicle up, and I said, God, every time you'd start it, it would start and I'd go boom, and the motor would jump. Well, here, there's only 4 bolts holding the motor in. They hadn't even tightened them down. 2 of them were gone, and 2 of them were just loose, Same thing, it wouldn't idle. It would kind of stutter. Well, here on the spark plugs, they hadn't taken, you got to take that little cap off the spark plug wire so that, or off the end of the spark plug so wire goes on. They hadn't done that. They had simply set the spark plug wires on the top. So when it idled, they just jumped around. Well, that's no good because, like I said, they got a seal into that cowling too. It was, and that is, I think, the last time I ever had anybody doing mechanical work for me. I'd much sooner do it myself if I'm going to end up having to do it over again anyway. It's just better to do it myself. But at the time, I didn't have a place to do it in, or the tools I thought I need, or the experience on working on a motor like that. So it's not a big deal for me now. So, tool-wise, it was nice to have this. This did make splitting it easier. But you really, when you have somebody else do something like that, really the odds of them doing it right are actually kind of slim, unfortunately. I don't, that's a lot of now people who are mechanics, they aren't really, they'll replace a whole motor. They don't work on motors. If a motor's going to rebuild, it's shipped down to Mexico or something. They don't do that sort of thing here anymore. Everything is crate engines. You just buy a motor and you put it in. They have no comprehension of what's actually going on in the motor. I like to get into the nitty-gritty of the thing. So I figure, as long as I'm in here, it's interesting to do it one time, don't want to have to do it again, So I'm thinking, as much money as I'm pouring into the rest of the bus, I might as well, put some effort in and do this. But I'll have to figure out. It's kind of funny, like the main bearings, they aren't a split shell bearing, only the center one is. The outside ones slide on, so they're, but I'm pretty sure they're lettered as to what oversize they are. Because I suspect that it's them, though it could be the rod bearings that are oversized. I know they aren't standard, because it had been reground and balanced for that V car, for the V racing. So it should be a good crank. Well, and the crank never gave me a problem. After I had to switch it to one time. And you can get all kinds of parts for them, but I'm not trying to build this into, I'm trying to keep it stock. I mean, you can get all kinds of performance parts, but anytime you do that, you do cut the life of a machine down. I'd rather trust the design that Porsche came up with for the Nazis in the first place. I think I just go stock with it again. But I will have to tear the connecting rods off so I can look at them. But they're kind of an interesting motor. Fairly compact for 40 horse, but there again, like my 500 Yamaha makes 30-some horsepower. It's a lot more compact than these, but very intricately designed. The way it's put together is kind of interesting. Kind of like when I take apart them Husqvarna chainsaws, I'm always fascinated with the engineering on them. Just the little tricky things they did. It impresses me. They aren't a crude machine by any means. They're very intricate. And the casting and stuff. Like this is a fantastic casting. There's nothing crude about this at all. And it's interesting, too, that, you're running, the cylinders are opposed out the sides, but your camshaft is below your crankshaft, which is great as far as oiling. Then there's a sump down below here that pulls the oil out and runs it back up, but they don't actually even run an oil filter. They have a little screen that is underneath. And I'm going to replace that because they are relatively cheap. But it's kind of, I think they do make external filters you can put on them. But there again, really, I'm not that involved with filters. If you assemble it clean and keep clean oil in it, it's really not a problem. Though I will probably put a magnetic drain plug in because that it did not have, and really any motor, it's nice to have a magnetic drain plug. So if there's a problem developing, you can catch it. When you change oil, you look and say, there's a lot of iron pilings. I know I got something going wrong. You can get wear on any of these gears are going to show up on that drain plug. But that's a good start. I got to tear it all. This crank, the shaft is just sitting in here now. I got to pull that out, get these cases stripped bare, clean them up as well as I can, and then I'm going to power wash them. So if I go down to Tractor Supply, which has that car wash next to it, I can bring these along. See, really, there isn't much to it, the case itself. See, here's what I was saying, but that center one is a half bearing, but the other ones are full bearings. And as I've been taking it apart, I've been, every group of fasteners and everything is going in its own bag so I can keep them straight. It's funny because, there's a lot of little pieces to these. But back when I was working on Harleys, I had them apart and together so many times, I knew every bolt and every screw. And half the time I knew the part numbers for them. I could just tear them apart, throw them in a tub, put it right back together. I knew where everything went. These are a little different. Since I don't do them as often. Somebody that did them a lot, but I don't know if there's a lot of people that do them a lot anymore. But good to get that apart. The one thing I was going to bring up, I've been hesitating to do videos. I get real tired of having to tiptoe around. It's very easy to get yourself in trouble on YouTube now. You can get a strike, you can get shut down in a hurry. And people have been getting to be more aware of this all the time. But it's very easy to do. And the rules change constantly, so, it's a pretty iffy proposition. But I have an email the other day, or a message from YouTube or from Google, that surprised me a little, confused me a little. They demanded to know my date of birth. And I thought, well, that's odd. I kind of thought that they did. When I first signed up, like 10 years ago, I thought they probably would have got it then. But they're acting like they didn't. So I don't know, maybe at that time they didn't. Of course, it wasn't Google then yet. It was just YouTube. But anyway, they did, demanding I give them my date of birth, saying the law requires it now. Well, that surprised me. It's an odd thing, but they keep coming up with these odd little rules. But I didn't, because I'm an outlaw anyway. I don't, I'm not going to, I could see no reason that they need to have my date of birth. Your first instinct to say, oh, well, what the hell, go ahead, but then I'm thinking, the only reason I really want it, well, they claim it's because it's a law, but I'm thinking it's for their targeting advertising better. But by using that crutch saying, oh, it's the law, you have to do it because it's the law, I'm suspicious of anything like that. I know one day, about a week ago, I got a message from them again, it was something to do, this time it was, you know, they if you make income off of YouTube, they send you this tax statement, and they want to charge you income tax on this. It was some letter threatening something to do with the tax situation. Well, I kind of don't play with that anyway. But I thought that was interesting. But then I did read something one day, too, that I thought was a little weird. This had to do with, you know, like it used to be, like, say, on eBay, you could sell stuff that came from your private collection. If you weren't a business, if you were just, you had collected up, like, say, a whole bunch of China cats, and you decided you were going to sell off your collection of China cats, that was perfectly fine, and you didn't have to charge sale tax for them or anything. You know, you could just sell your collection off. Now there's a limit. I think they had dropped the limit way down. You know, it used to be you could do so many $1,000s before you were considered a business, and they would report what you sold, you know, the income from that, so they could get tax on it. You know, they wanted sales tax, they wanted income tax, they want, you know, everything. Every time they can tax something, that's what they want to do. You know, it used to be like years ago, in a thrift store, they didn't have to charge sales tax. The theory being, this stuff has been taxed before. You know, why do you, on a used item, why do you have to keep taxing it every time it changes hands? But they had to start doing it. Same with rummage sales now. They want to tax you on everything. You know, like if you can have like 2 rummage sales a year. If you have more than that, then you have to get a tax number and start withholding, you know, charging sales tax. And, you know, the government likes to get involved in anything of that sort of thing that they can, if they can get a couple of bucks out of this. And it builds up, they get a huge bureaucracy going behind this, you know, to run it. And at one time I had, you know, tax numbers for like 3 states, but then you got to keep filing, and some of them it was like every, like 2 months or something. It was crazy, you know, so I just dropped all them, and I don't, and actually, you know, like when I was selling online, selling the rugs, there again, there was this thing, you know, I used to do it on Etsy, and then when Etsy went from being a privately owned concern to a publicly traded company, all of a sudden, then they want to start doing sales tax, you know, that you have to register as a business kind of to do it. And it used to be, it was just regular people selling stuff that they made. And it always kind of aggravates me that if I make something that has nothing to do with the government, and somebody else buys it from me, why does the government want to wet their beak on this? You know, that isn't any of their concern. But you're going to see a lot more of that on all kinds of stuff. They're going to be, you know, like we've talked about before, they want to sneak in a little ammunition tax. And like for getting your background checks that they want to, they're mandatory, but then they want to have a little fee for them, you know, that sort of thing. They're going to nickel and dime me to death. So I try to stay out of that as much as I can. But I thought it was interesting that, you know, that YouTube wants to, or, you know, they want to get involved in this tax angle on the thing. You know, because if it gets to that point where this becomes a problem, I just simply won't monetize. But at the same time, unless they can straighten out their rules and regulations so that you don't have to tiptoe around, I can't see the point of even making videos. You know, if you, what are you going to do? Nothing but cat videos is the only safe thing, and even then you can get in trouble. You know, I don't know. It's taken a strange turn. But, like I said, they wanted my birth date because it was the law. And like I said, I'm an outlaw. I refuse to do it. You know, if they wouldn't have said it in that way, you know, maybe, but it was almost like a threat kind of thing, which to me, just struck me wrong. So until they can prove to me that this is a law, but they do, they constantly update their terms of service and all this crap, And the same, eBay does the same thing. They're constantly updating their terms of service. And you can't keep up with it. So I don't know. Because really the only thing I deal with now, well, I do a lot of eBay stuff because a lot of my parts come off eBay. And then there is this YouTube thing. But if this YouTube thing gets to be a tax liability, it's a little risky in the first place. Even, like if you show a gun, there are people, if they can get a good view of the serial number, there are people who are actually keeping track of the serial numbers of the guns that were on your video. Which is like a lot of times you see people have a tape over them, and you think, they're paranoid. No, there's a good reason for it, because there are actually organizations that look for that sort of thing. Kind of weird, kind of spooky, but the world is a kind of weird, spooky place. And I see Minnesota's opened up their shopping season again, getting the riots going. Everybody gets new shoes. But to loot a dollar store, I thought, well, you're getting pretty low if you're going to loot a dollar store. But have at her. That's just the Minnesota way.